What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time to look back at our preseason predictions in the SEC. So I'll show you what the records were, what my predictions were. We'll also look at Athlon Sports because they actually give a record prediction. I wish all these preseason magazines and everything would give an actual record prediction. Go ahead, go out there and make a prediction. It's really annoying. A lot of them just kind of give a projection and list the teams. But Athlon gives a prediction, so we'll look at their predictions. Also, see what Vegas, see how they did as far as the over-unders. You look at the SEC, and the only team that really surprised me, I mean, there were some surprises a little bit. Texas A&M surprised me being as bad as they were, but I wasn't very high on them. But Alabama was probably the team that really surprised me because I thought this team was a lock for the college football playoff. I thought they would at least get to 11-1 in the regular season. I didn't think there was any way they would lose 2 games. So that was the one team where I feel like they just were not the team that I thought they would be. Most of the other teams were pretty much what I expected. Of course, some close games here and there can change the record, but as far as just the quality of the teams, the SEC was about what I expected it to be this year. Again, Bama, not as good as I thought, and you could definitely say Texas A&M was worse than I expected. So let's get into it here. We'll start with the East and take a look at the records, and we're going to list the record in one possession games here as well. I'll be circling back to that. I'll do another series where we talk about the teams that were overrated and underrated based off of their record in one possession games, and see what their record would have been if they had won all those games, lost all those games, split all those games. That's another video series that we'll be doing here shortly. But I just wanted to show that just to kind of give you an idea of how the season could have gone a lot different. And you look at Georgia, didn't really have many one possession games. Tennessee was 3-0 in one possession games, meaning they could have easily been 9-3 or 8-4. South Carolina could have been 7-5 very easily. Kentucky, they split theirs. They were 7-5. Florida split theirs. Missouri was 2-4. You can see they could have been 7-5. Vanderbilt, they were 2-1 in one-score games. They were a surprise this year as well. So yeah, I talked about Alabama being a surprise. Vanderbilt's another surprise. I didn't really see them winning a conference game. So hats off to the Commodores. They definitely surprised me as well. All right, so here were the predictions for Georgia. I had them at 12-0. Athlon had them at 12-0, and the over/under was at 10.5. That was some easy money there. I mean, who would have picked this team to not at least go 11-1? So we hit this one right on the mark. 12-0 for the Bulldogs. Athlon again also had them at 12-0, and like I said, the over/under was very easy here. With their schedule, yeah, there was just really not much of a chance they were going to go 10-2. How about Tennessee? I had them at 8-4. Athlon also had them at 8-4. The over/under was at 7.5. So the 8-4 actually would have been correct looking at the over/under. But again, we go back to those one-score games, and Tennessee could have easily been 9-3 or 8-4. If they had actually shown up against South Carolina, they could have been very easily 11-1, though, I guess you could say. But an 8-4 season for them was my prediction. Same thing for Athlon, but no, they go 10-2 and beating Alabama. Of course, that was the big story. That was a huge win for them. That made their season, even though they did lose to South Carolina. I think Tennessee fans very happy with 10-2, and they definitely proved us wrong. Did better than I expected. Let's go to South Carolina now. I predicted them to go 7-5. Athlon had them at 6-6. The over/under is at 6. And so once again, if you went with my pick, you would have been right against Vegas because they went over 6. 7-5. My prediction. I was very close. I think the only game I missed as far as the individual games was the Clemson game. Didn't really see them going on the road and winning that one, but they did. Very impressive win there to close out the season and get to 8-4 and finish in the top 25. Great year for the Gamecocks. Let's go now to Kentucky. I had them at 8-4. I was a little bit higher on this team. Just reversed that Vanderbilt game, and then we're right on the money. Again, I did not expect them to lose to Vanderbilt. Didn't really see Vandy beating anyone in the conference. And so, yes, Kentucky, we missed the mark by 1. The over-under was at 8, so I wouldn't have bet anything there anyways. But very close with Kentucky. Again, I would say for the most part, the East was about how I expected it to be. Florida, I had them at 7-5. They were one game under that at 6-6. With a lot of close games, they could have easily been 7-5, 8-4, but they also could have easily been 5-7 or 4-8. So it was a very mediocre season for Florida, right there in the middle, 6-6, also going 500 in their one-score games. And again, just very close on the over/under. I wouldn't have had a pick with Vegas because theirs was at 7 and I was at 7-5 as well. But I would say that was a pretty good prediction. Missouri, so we missed this one pretty bad. They were 6-6. I had them at 4-8. I did not see this team doing what they did this year. Hats off to Eli Drinkowitz. I mean, they really played tough this season. And remember that Auburn game where they fumbled in overtime? Really should have won that game. So 7-5 they were very close to going 7-5. Athlon was not high on them either. They had them at 5-7. The over/under was at 5.5. So Vegas was right on the money, really, with Missouri, and I was just wrong. I missed this team. They were just a lot better than I expected them to be. So that's another team that was, I guess, a surprise in the SEC. And then Vandy, I had them at 3-9. So did Athlon, but that's still, over/under was at 2.5. So if you go over, they did go 5-7. You would have been correct. So at least we beat Vegas here, but. Just surprised me the way they played and the way they were able to win some conference games this year. Did not see that one coming. All right, let's go now to the SEC West. You take a look at, we've got LSU at the top just because they were number 1 in the standings, even though Alabama had the better overall record. You see Mississippi State, Ole Miss, both going 8-4. Solid seasons for them. Arkansas 6-6, a bit of a disappointment. Auburn and A&M also disappointing seasons, big time obviously for Texas A&M. You look at the one-score games, what jumps out here, Mississippi State was pretty fortunate to get to 8-4 with a couple of close wins. Arkansas could have easily been 7-5 or 8-4. 1-4 in one possession games. That's not very good. And Texas A&M, they were 2-5 in one-score games. If you're expecting Texas A&M to be awful again next year, I think you're going to be surprised because, again, you look at how close they were in a lot of games this year, the injuries that they had, the talent they have on the roster. This team is, I think, going to turn it around next year and be much better than 5-7. We'll see. But, again, a very big disappointment this year. Let's go now to the predictions, and we'll start with LSU. I had them at 8-4, so did Athlon. This is a team that was really about as good as I expected them to be. Remember, they had some games they could have lost. Even that Auburn game, they were down big early in that one. Ole Miss, Mississippi State, you look at those games. The over-under was at 7, so if you go with the 8-4 prediction, actually, we would have been correct. They beat the over-under, going 9-3. Great season, winning the SEC West, of course. And, again, about what I expected them to be. You change the Alabama game, you give them a loss there, and they would have been right there at 8-4. Alabama, I already talked about them. I expected them to go 12-0. Athlon expected them to go 12-0. And I didn't think there was any way they would go under 10.5, but they did. And, looking back at it, they did have a very tough schedule on the road this year with Texas, LSU, also Tennessee, and just the fact that they didn't play well on the road, and that caught up to them, cost them a couple of games. You go back to that Texas game, very close to losing that one. They could have been 9-3 very easily. Obviously, they could have won those games against LSU and Tennessee and been 12-0, but I think their record really does reflect about how good they were. They were about a 10-2 team this year. Mississippi State, I had them at 7-5. Athlon also had them at 7-5. The over/under was at 6.5, so we would have won there. A little bit better than I expected them to be. But, again, about where I did predict Mississippi State. 8-4, I had them at 7-5. Ole Miss, I had it 8-4. They went 8-4. The over-under was at 7.5. So, once again, would have been correct with the over-under. And I believe I did the math in the SEC, and I would have been at 8-4. 8-4 against the over-unders in this conference. So, if you just went with my picks and bet the over-unders, you could have won some money. I don't gamble myself, so not telling you to go do that, but I'm just going by these predictions. I'm just telling you how accurate they were, at least against Vegas. And then you have Arkansas. Let's take a look at their predictions. 8-4. That was my prediction. Athlon also 8-4. Would have missed this one on the over/under. The over/under was at 7.5. And again, they go 6-6. So a disappointing year for Arkansas. But we go back to that record in the one-score games, 1-4. If you just win a couple of those games, then that changes things, and they could have been 8-4. But that's usually the difference with a lot of these teams. How did they do in those one-score games? Arkansas, I think, was better than their 6-6 record would suggest, but they didn't win those games, and that's what the record wound up being. All right, Auburn, I had them at 7-5. Athlon had them at 6-6. I talked about this in the preseason. I really was going to put them at 6-6, but something just kind of changed my mind right at the end when I looked at the offensive line and the experience they have coming back. Of course, Nick Brahms wound up retiring. That kind of changed things. That happened after my prediction. If I had known that, probably would have stuck with the 6-6 prediction for Auburn. But they finished pretty strong. They were able to beat Texas A&M, but it just wasn't a good year for them. Brian Harsin was never a good fit, and now you look to the future with Hugh Freeze. We'll see if they can turn things around. And against Vegas, we would have missed on this one as well, because they had them. Vegas was pretty high, 6.5. I'm surprised that wasn't like 5.5, honestly, with the expectations coming in. But they disappointed. They disappointed for sure at 5-7, and obviously Texas A&M disappointed as well at 5-7. I had them at 8-4, so I missed pretty bad. But I'm going to take a little bit of credit for not buying into the hype and putting them at 10-2 or 9-3 in the top 10, where a lot of people had this team. The over/under was at 8.5, so I was under that, and of course they were way under that at 5-7. I think they were better than their 5-7 record. At times, they looked like a 5-7 team, but other times they looked more like a 7-5 team, and they did lose a lot of those close games. And a very big disappointment this year for Texas A&M. But like I said, I believe they will turn things around to be much better next year. So again, just kind of recapping my predictions here. We didn't miss really too badly on many teams. Texas A&M was pretty bad. There were some teams we missed by a couple of games, like Arkansas and Alabama. But overall, I feel like I had a pretty good idea of how the SEC was going to go this year. Obviously not perfect, but overall the teams were pretty close to what I expected, and were pretty close to what I think most people expected. Of course, again, Texas A&M was that big surprise as far as a disappointment, and Alabama, maybe you could throw them in there as well. Surprise teams, Tennessee going 10-2, but a lot of people did expect that from Tennessee, and so they didn't surprise too many people. They did surprise me because I didn't have them quite that high, and I didn't have them beating Alabama. So, yeah, the dominoes kind of fall there. If I just change my Alabama predictions, if I had Alabama correct, then I would have LSU correct and would have been closer there on Tennessee as well. So that's really where it all started. Alabama being a big disappointment, Vanderbilt being a bit of a surprise. That you start with those two teams, you change those predictions, and that would have made my predictions look a whole lot better. So what did you think about this season? How were your predictions from the preseason? Let me know what you had for these teams and how accurate you were. The teams you missed, the teams you got right. Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.